The autumn rain drummed steadily against the towering windows of the Madison Theatre, its rhythmic pattering echoing through the opulent lobby like a melancholy symphony. Rosa Martinez pushed her cleaning cart through the marble hallways, her worn sneakers silent against the polished floors that reflected the crystal chandeliers hanging overhead like frozen waterfalls of light. At 28, Rosa had perfected the art of invisibility. For 3 years she had navigated these halls after midnight, when the theatre transformed from a bustling palace of performance into a cathedral of solitude. The Madison Theatre, owned by real estate mogul Charles Whitman, was Manhattan's crown jewel, a restored 1920s venue that hosted Broadway tryouts and exclusive performances for New York's elite. Rosa's calloused hands gripped the mop handle as she worked her way through the orchestra section, methodically cleaning each row of plush burgundy seats. The ghost light stood sentinel on the empty stage, its single bare bulb casting long shadows across the velvet curtains. She had always wondered about that tradition, leaving one light burning through the night to keep the theatre's spirits at bay. Not that she believed in such things, but there was something comforting about that solitary beacon in the darkness. The weight of her double life pressed heavily on her shoulders as she worked. By day, she was a cashier at a corner bodega in Washington Heights, scanning barcodes and counting change for neighborhood regulars who barely looked her in the eye. By night, she became the silent guardian of dreams, cleaning up after performances she could never afford to attend. The irony wasn't lost on her. She spent more time in this theater than most of the actors who graced its stage, yet she remained perpetually on the outside looking in. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket. A text from her younger sister, Carmen. "Mommy's asking about the rent again. Can you help this month?" Rosa's heart sank as she read the message. Their mother's medical bills from her diabetes treatment were mounting, and Carmen was struggling to balance community college with her part-time job at a local restaurant. Rosa quickly typed back, "I'll figure it out. Don't worry." But worry was all she seemed to do lately. The bodega job barely covered her own expenses, and the theater cleaning position, while better paying, wasn't enough to support her family's growing needs. She had applied to countless other jobs, but without a college degree or specialized skills, her options remained frustratingly limited. As she moved toward the stage, Rosa's eyes fell upon a discarded program from that evening's performance, a workshop presentation of Dreams Deferred, a new musical about immigrants chasing the American dream. She picked it up, studying the glossy photographs of the cast members, all perfectly coiffed and radiating the kind of confidence that seemed as foreign to her as a distant planet. The irony of the musical's theme struck her like a physical blow. Here she was, the daughter of Mexican immigrants cleaning up after a show about people just like her family, yet remaining invisible to the very world that profited from their stories. Her parents had crossed the border with nothing but hope and determination, believing that hard work would be enough to build a better life for their children. Rosa had inherited that work ethic, but somewhere along the way, the dreams had gotten lost in the struggle to survive. She climbed the steps to the stage, her footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. The work lights cast harsh shadows across the set pieces, a modest recreation of a tenement apartment, complete with fire escape and laundry lines. It was meant to represent the humble beginnings of the characters in the musical, but to Rosa, it looked remarkably similar to the building where she had grown up. As she began to sweep the stage, fragments of dialogue from the evening's performance drifted through her memory. She had overheard bits and pieces while cleaning the dressing rooms, where actors often left their doors ajar, too focused on their post-show routines to notice the cleaning lady moving through the hallways like a ghost. "The problem with Act 2 is that Maria's motivation isn't clear," she had heard one of the actresses say to the director. "Why would she suddenly decide to pursue singing when she's been so focused on survival?" Rosa had paused outside the dressing room, mop in hand, struck by the comment. She understood Maria's motivation better than any of them ever could. Music wasn't a choice for people like Maria, or like Rosa herself. It was a lifeline, a way to transcend circumstances that threatened to crush the spirit. Rosa had been singing since she could talk. Lullabies her grandmother had taught her, songs that carried the weight of generations of struggle and hope. She had never told anyone about her voice, about the way music seemed to flow through her like water, finding its natural course. In her apartment, when her family was asleep, she would hum quietly to herself, creating melodies that seemed to capture everything she couldn't say in words. At the bodega, she would sing softly while stocking shelves, unaware that regular customers had begun timing their visits just to hear her unconscious performances. The stage felt different beneath her feet, not like a floor to be cleaned, but like a space waiting to be filled. Rosa set down her mop and walked to center stage, looking out at the empty seats that had held an audience just hours before. The ghost light cast her shadow across the orchestra section, making her appear larger than life for just a moment. Without thinking, she began to hum one of the melodies from the musical, a haunting tune about holding on to dreams when the world seems determined to steal them away. Her voice, rich and untrained but naturally powerful, filled the empty theater with a sound that seemed to awaken the sleeping space. The acoustics carried her voice to every corner of the venue, transforming her humble humming into something magnificent. For 3 minutes, Rosa allowed herself to imagine what it would feel like to belong on this stage, to have her story matter, to be seen rather than invisible. Then, like Cinderella at midnight, reality crashed back down around her. She was a cleaning lady with bills to pay and a family depending on her. Rosa picked up her mop and continued working, unaware that her voice had carried beyond the theater walls, through an open window to the fire escape where someone had been standing in the rain, listening to every note. Marcus Chen stood motionless on the fire escape outside the Madison Theater, rain soaking through his designer jacket as Rosa's voice wrapped around him like a revelation. As the theater's music director and Charles Whitman's protege, Marcus had heard thousands of auditions, coached dozens of Broadway hopefuls, and witnessed countless performances. But nothing had prepared him for the raw, unpolished beauty of the voice echoing from within the empty theater. He had been working late in his cramped office on the 3rd floor, wrestling with the musical arrangements for Dreams Deferred, when he decided to step outside for air. The production was struggling. The investors were growing impatient, the cast was losing confidence, and Charles Whitman was breathing down his neck for results. The show needed something authentic, something that could bridge the gap between the polished Broadway machine and the genuine emotion the story demanded. And now, impossibly, that something was cleaning the stage below. Marcus pulled out his phone and hit record, capturing the last minute of Rosa's unconscious performance. Her voice carried a weight that most trained singers spent years trying to achieve, the kind of emotional honesty that couldn't be taught in conservatories or learned from vocal coaches. It was the sound of lived experience, of dreams deferred but not abandoned. When the singing stopped, Marcus remained frozen on the fire escape, watching through the rain-streaked window as the cleaning woman, he couldn't see her face clearly from this angle, returned to her work, as if nothing extraordinary had happened. The casual way she picked up her mop and continued cleaning suggested she had no idea of the magic she had just created. 20 minutes later, Marcus made his way back through the theater's side entrance, timing his movements to intersect with the cleaning crew's schedule. He had learned their routines over the months of late-night work sessions. The security guard made his rounds every 2 hours. The cleaning staff worked systematically from the lobby to the stage, finishing around 3 a.m. He found Rosa in the mezzanine level, carefully dusting the ornate railings that overlooked the orchestra section. Up close, she was younger than he had expected, with tired eyes that suggested someone carrying more responsibility than her years should warrant. Her movements were efficient and practiced, but Marcus noticed how her gaze occasionally drifted toward the stage below, lingering there with an expression he recognized, the look of someone who belonged somewhere they had never been invited. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly, not wanting to startle her. Rosa looked up, immediately shifting into the defensive posture of someone accustomed to being invisible. "I'm sorry, is there a problem? I can come back to this section later if you need to work." "No, no problem at all." Marcus gestured toward the stage. "I just wanted to ask, do you ever notice the acoustics in here, how sound carries?" Rosa's expression became guarded. "I just clean, sir. I don't really pay attention to..." She trailed off, studying his face more carefully. "You're the music director, aren't you? I've seen you in the hallways." Marcus nodded. "Marcus Chen. And you are?" "Rosa Martinez." She gripped her cleaning cloth tighter. "Am I in trouble? I know I'm not supposed to be on the stage, but I was just sweeping." "You're not in trouble." Marcus leaned against the railing, choosing his words carefully. "Rosa, I have to ask you something, and I hope you'll be honest with me. Do you sing?" The question hung in the air between them like a bridge Rosa was afraid to cross. Her silence stretched long enough that Marcus began to wonder if he had imagined the entire thing, if the stress of the failing production had finally caused him to hallucinate the solution to all his problems. "Why would you ask me that?" Rosa's voice was barely above a whisper. "Because 20 minutes ago I heard someone singing on that stage, and it was the most honest interpretation of our music I've ever heard." Marcus pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the recording. and the only person in the building was you. Rosa's face went through a series of emotions: surprise, fear, embarrassment, and something that might have been hope before she shut it down. I sometimes hum while I work. I didn't know anyone could hear. Rosa, I've been working in theater for 15 years. I know the difference between humming and performing. Marcus pocketed his phone without playing the recording, sensing that pushing too hard would spook her. Where did you learn to sing like that? I didn't learn anywhere. Rosa resumed her dusting with unnecessary vigor. My grandmother used to sing to me when I was little. Mexican folk songs mostly. It's not the same thing as real singing. Real singing? Marcus couldn't hide his incredulity. Rosa, what you did down there, that was more real than anything I've heard in months of auditions. The compliments seemed to overwhelm her. Rosa set down her cleaning supplies and looked directly at him for the first time. Mr. Chen, I appreciate what you're saying, but I think you're mistaken. I work 2 jobs to help support my family. I clean offices and stock shelves. I'm not the kind of person who gets to sing on stages like this. The resignation in her voice broke something in Marcus's chest. He recognized the tone. It was the same way his own father had spoken about his abandoned dreams of being a painter. The same way his mother dismissed her poetry as just something I used to do. It was the voice of someone who had been taught that survival and dreams were mutually exclusive. What if I told you that wasn't true? Marcus said quietly. What if I told you that the show we're working on, Dreams Deferred, it's about people exactly like you, and we're failing because we don't have anyone who truly understands that story? Rosa shook her head, but Marcus caught the flicker of interest in her eyes. I don't know anything about theater. I've never even seen a real show. But you know about working 2 jobs to support your family. You know about dreams that feel impossible. You know about being invisible in places where you spend most of your time. Marcus gestured toward the stage. That character, Maria, she's supposed to be you, but we've been trying to tell her story with people who've never lived it. The theater's ancient heating system kicked on, filling the silence with a low hum that seemed to underscore the weight of the moment. Rosa looked down at the stage, then back at Marcus. Even if what you're saying is true, she said slowly, I have responsibilities, people depending on me. I understand. Marcus reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. But would you consider auditioning? Just once, tomorrow night after the theater closes. Rosa stared at the card as if it might burst into flames. I don't know how to audition. Just sing, Marcus said. The way you were singing tonight. That's all we need. Rosa stared at her reflection in the cracked mirror of the theater's employee restroom, Marcus's business card trembling in her hands. 24 hours had passed since their conversation, and she had changed her mind a dozen times. The audition was scheduled for 11 p.m. after the evening's performance of Dreams Deferred had ended and the regular cast had gone home. She had spent the day at the bodega in a fog, mechanically scanning items while her mind raced between possibility and terror. Her co-worker Miguel had noticed her distraction, commenting that she seemed like someone who won the lottery but lost the ticket. The comparison felt more accurate than he knew. During her lunch break, Rosa had walked to the public library and spent an hour researching Broadway auditions on the computer. The video she watched filled her with equal parts inspiration and intimidation. Polished performers with perfect technique, executing complex vocal runs that seemed as foreign to her as speaking Mandarin. Every clip reinforced the voice in her head that whispered she didn't belong in that world. But then she remembered Marcus's words. That was more real than anything I've heard in months of auditions. The evening shift at the theater felt different. Rosa found herself studying the actors as they prepared for the show, watching how they carried themselves with a confidence that seemed built into their DNA. During the first act, she positioned herself where she could hear portions of the performance, finally experiencing Dreams Deferred as an audience member rather than just the person who cleaned up afterward. The story followed Maria Santos, a young woman working multiple jobs to support her family, while secretly dreaming of becoming a singer. The parallels to Rosa's own life were unsettling in their accuracy, but as she listened to the actress portraying Maria, Rosa felt a disconnect between the words and the emotion. The performance was technically proficient, but felt hollow, like someone describing the taste of hunger without ever having missed a meal. When the show ended, and the theater began its nightly transformation back to emptiness, Rosa's nerves reached a crescendo. She had hidden a simple black dress in her locker, the same one she wore to church on Sundays, and had borrowed her sister Carmen's makeup to cover the exhaustion that seemed permanently etched under her eyes. At 10:55 p.m., Rosa knocked on the door of Marcus's office. her hand shaking so violently she could barely make contact with the wood. "Come in," Marcus called. She entered to find him seated at his piano, sheet music spread across the top like a paper battlefield. The office was cramped and cluttered, with coffee-stained scores and photographs of past productions covering every available surface. It felt more like a graduate student's dorm room than the workspace of a successful music director. "Rosa," Marcus looked up with a smile that seemed genuinely relieved. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "I almost didn't." Rosa remained standing near the door, as if keeping her escape route clear. "I still don't understand why you think I can do this." Marcus gestured to the chair across from his piano. "Because I've been working on this show for 8 months, and in 8 months, no one has made me feel what you made me feel in 3 minutes of unconscious singing." Rosa sat down, clutching her purse like a life preserver. "What if I embarrass myself? What if I freeze up? What if you don't?" Marcus interrupted gently. "Rosa, there's no wrong way to do this. I'm not looking for perfection, I'm looking for truth." He handed her a single sheet of music, the song she had been humming the night before, titled Más que sobrevivir, More Than Surviving. This is Maria's 11 o'clock number, the moment when she decides that surviving isn't enough anymore, that she needs to live. Rosa studied the lyrics, her eyes widening as she read words that seemed pulled directly from her own thoughts. "I know this feeling," she whispered. "I know you do." Marcus positioned his hands over the piano keys. "That's why you're here." The opening chords filled the small office, and Rosa felt something shift inside her chest. The melody she had hummed unconsciously the night before now had a structure, a foundation that made her voice feel less like a secret and more like a language she was meant to speak. She began softly, almost conversationally, as if she were telling the story to a friend rather than performing. But as the song progressed, her voice grew stronger, more confident. She sang about working before dawn, about dreams deferred but not forgotten, about the weight of carrying everyone else's hopes while your own grew heavier with each passing day. When she reached the bridge, the moment when Maria declares her intention to be more than just a survivor, Rosa's voice cracked with genuine emotion. She wasn't performing anymore, she was confessing. Every note carried the weight of her mother's medical bills, her sister's uncertain future, her own buried aspirations. Marcus stopped playing, but Rosa continued a cappella, her voice filling the small space with raw power. She sang about the moment when staying safe becomes more dangerous than taking a risk, when the fear of remaining invisible becomes greater than the fear of being seen. The final note hung in the air long after Rosa finished, neither of them moving to break the spell. "Jesus," Marcus whispered finally. "Rosa, do you have any idea what you just did?" Rosa wiped tears from her cheeks, surprised to find she had been crying. "I felt like I was talking about my own life." "You were, that's exactly what you were doing." Marcus stood up from the piano bench, his expression intense. "Rosa, I need to ask you something serious. Would you consider reading for the role of Maria?" The question hit Rosa like a physical blow. "Read for the role? You mean audition for the actual show?" "I mean audition to replace our current Maria." Marcus began pacing the small office. "The investors are meeting next week to decide whether to move forward with the production. Our current cast is talented, but they're not connecting with the material. You just connected with it in a way that made me understand the song for the first time, and I wrote it." Rosa's mind reeled. "But I don't know how to act. I've never been on a stage in front of people." "I don't have any training." "You have something better than training," Marcus interrupted. "You have authenticity. You have lived this story." Through the office window, Rosa could see the ghost light on the empty stage, that solitary beacon cutting through the darkness. 24 hours ago, she had stood on that stage and allowed herself to imagine just for a moment what it would feel like to belong there. Now someone was offering her the chance to find out. "If I said yes," Rosa said slowly, "what would happen to my other jobs? My family depends on that income." Marcus sat back down, his expression serious. "If you get the part, you'd be paid as a professional actor. Union scale for an off-Broadway production. It's not going to make you rich, but it would be more than your current jobs combined." Rosa felt the room spinning slightly. More money, a chance to help her family while pursuing something that felt like destiny, but also the risk of losing everything if she failed. "I need time to think," she whispered. Marcus nodded. "Take all the time you need. But Rosa, don't let fear make this decision for you." 3 days later, Rosa stood in the wings of the Madison Theater, her heart hammering against her ribs as she listened to the murmur of the audience beyond the curtain. Word had spread through Manhattan's tight-knit theater community about the unknown discovery who would be making her debut in Dreams Deferred. Critics, investors, and industry insiders filled the seats alongside regular theatergoers, all curious to witness what many were calling either a brilliant gamble or an inevitable disaster. Charles Whitman himself sat in the front row, his silver hair gleaming under the theater lights, his expression unreadable. The millionaire real estate mogul who owned the theater had initially been skeptical of Marcus's unconventional casting choice, but when Rosa had auditioned for him and the creative team 3 nights ago, even Whitman's practiced stoicism had cracked. "She doesn't sing the song," he had murmured afterward. "She lives it." Rosa adjusted the simple blue dress that the costume department had provided. Nothing fancy, just something that Maria Santos might wear to her factory job. Her hands shook as she touched the small silver cross at her throat, a gift from her grandmother that she had worn for luck. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of intensive coaching. Marcus had worked with her for hours, not to change her voice, but to help her trust it. A dialect coach had helped her find Maria's accent, not unlike Rosa's own, but shaped by different circumstances. Most importantly, the director had encouraged her to draw from her own experiences, to let Rosa Martinez inform Maria Santos. "Places, everyone," the stage manager called softly. "This is your places call." Rosa took her position upstage, hidden behind a recreation of a New York tenement building. Through the false windows, she could see the other actors taking their marks, professionals who had welcomed her with a mixture of curiosity and generosity that had surprised her. The actress she was replacing, Jennifer Walsh, had even stayed to help with the transition, offering encouragement despite the professional disappointment. "You belong here," Jennifer had told her during their final rehearsal. "I've been acting for 10 years, and I've never felt a song the way you feel that material. Don't let anyone tell you this is charity. You earned this." The house lights dimmed, and Rosa felt the familiar transformation of the theater from ordinary space to sacred ground. The orchestra began the overture, and she closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. Somewhere in the audience, her mother and Carmen sat in the 3rd row, the first time either of them had ever attended a professional theater production. Rosa had bought their tickets with her first advance payment, wanting them to witness this moment that felt impossible, even as it was happening. The opening scenes unfolded with Rosa watching from the wings, absorbing the energy of live performance. When her entrance arrived, Maria returning home from her night shift at a hotel laundry, Rosa stepped onto the stage and felt the weight of 100 gazes settle upon her. For a moment, the lights felt blinding, the silence expectant and terrifying. Then Rosa remembered Marcus's words, "Don't perform Maria, be Rosa in Maria's circumstances." She moved across the stage with the tired gait of someone who had been on her feet for 12 hours, her shoulders carrying the weight that Rosa knew intimately. When she spoke her first lines, Maria greeting her sleeping family, her voice carried the tenderness of someone who loved people she couldn't save. The first act progressed like a dream. Rosa found herself inhabiting Maria's world with an ease that surprised everyone, including herself. The other actors responded to her authenticity, their own performances deepening in response to her honesty. When the moment arrived for Más que sobrevivir, Rosa walked to center stage and felt the theater hold its breath. She began the song quietly, almost conversationally, as if she were talking to herself in her kitchen at dawn. The lyrics spoke of dreams that felt selfish when survival was uncertain, of talents that seemed frivolous when there were bills to pay. But as the song built, Maria's voice grew stronger, more determined. Rosa found herself thinking about her grandmother, who had crossed a desert to give her family a chance at something better. She thought about her mother, whose hands were permanently stained from years of house cleaning, but who had never complained. She thought about Carmen, studying by candlelight when the electricity was shut off, refusing to give up on her education. When she reached the bridge, the moment when Maria declares she must be more than just a survivor, Rosa's voice soared with a power that seemed to surprise even her. The song became a manifesto, a declaration that dreaming wasn't selfish when it was about becoming the person your sacrifices were meant to create. The final note rang out in perfect silence, and for a heartbeat, the theater seemed suspended in time. Then the applause began, not the polite appreciation of a typical theater audience, but something deeper, more personal. People were on their feet before they realized they were standing, responding to something that transcended performance and touched authenticity. Rosa looked out into the audience and saw tears on faces throughout the theater. In the 3rd row, her mother was sobbing openly while Carmen gripped her hand. Charles Whitman was applauding with tears streaming down his cheeks. Critics who had seen thousands of performances looked stunned, as if they had witnessed something they couldn't quite categorize. The rest of the show passed in a blur of music and movement, but Rosa felt transformed by that moment of connection. When the final curtain fell and the cast took their bows, the standing ovation seemed to last forever. Flowers rained onto the stage, and Rosa heard someone shout "Brava" from the balcony. Later, as the theater emptied and Rosa changed back into her street clothes, Marcus found her in the dressing room. "The Times critic wants to interview you," he said, grinning. "3 different agents have asked for your number, and Charles Whitman wants to discuss extending your contract." Rosa looked at herself in the mirror, the same face that had stared back at her from the employee restroom days ago, but somehow transformed. "Marcus, what happens now?" "Now you get to find out what it feels like to be seen," he said, "to have your story matter." Rosa smiled, touching her grandmother's cross. Through the dressing room window, she could see the ghost light being set on the empty stage, that solitary beacon that kept the theater's dreams alive through the darkness. For the first time in her life, Rosa Martinez wasn't invisible. She was exactly where she belonged. Outside in the October night, her family waited to take her home, but home would never be the same. She had discovered that sometimes the most extraordinary transformations happen not when you become someone else, but when you finally become fully yourself.